Traffic. You're stuck on a bridge waiting for the line to move, but you've been in your car for more than 2 hours. You're gonna be late to pick up your friend from the airport. Suddenly, the bridge starts shaking. Everyone gets out of their cars and runs to the other end of the bridge. But there are so many people panicking that they start pushing and shoving each other. The bolts on the bridge begin to snap one by one, making the bridge shake even more. Almost everyone has already crossed to the other side. But the first half of the bridge falls down, causing all the abandoned cars to slide to the ocean. You start climbing on them, trying to get to safe ground. Almost there, you jump over some cars and make it to safety. You make it just in time, because the whole bridge has collapsed into the ocean. Everyone is confused. You start to feel the ground inflating. Someone screams, and everyone starts to disperse like tiny ants. You run into the city center and see some buildings start to shake. The sidewalks are cracking. The fire hydrants burst open. All the glass in every building shatters. Everyone is running away from the buildings. Many cars are crashing into each other, blocking many paths for people. You see people get evacuated, so you follow them into the countryside, which has no buildings around. There are thousands of people standing side by side, scared and confused. Someone stands on a podium and announces that the Earth is expanding by 1 inch per second. Everyone is advised to go with escorted safety cars into the city to pack up their belongings and head to a new shelter. They have to be quick, or else the entire city will collapse. You enter one of these safety cars, and they take you back home. You can see the ground getting bigger and bigger. You reach downtown, where all the skyscrapers are. They're all swaying and might collapse any second. Suddenly, they all topple over each other just like dominoes. You were lucky enough to grab some of your things, but the buildings have trapped you inside. A helicopter comes out of nowhere to rescue you and everyone else. From an eagle-eye view, you can see the whole city crashing down. Every road is unrecognizable. Bridges and tunnels have completely collapsed. The helicopter takes you to the shelter, where you'll be spending the rest of your life. A group of scientists explain to you that the Earth's surface will increase by 40 miles in a month and by 500 miles in a year. That's even further than a trip from New York to Toronto. You're shocked by what you hear as the planet continues to expand. You were supposed to pick up your friend from the airport, but all the roads are destroyed now. Suddenly, you get a call from him. He landed just as the ground started expanding, and now he's stuck at the airport. You sneak off from the base, find a bike in the middle of the road, and head there. It'll take you a couple of hours to get there, since the helicopter took you to the opposite end of town. You ride along the bumpy road that has changed completely. The flat, open road is now full of many hills and trenches. The farmlands are inside out, and most mills are destroyed. You finally reach a mountain pass that looks very unstable. You have no choice but to go through it. It used to be a public hiking trail, but now it looks like a landfill. You get there slowly, looking out for any signs of danger. Many trees have been uprooted and are leaning on each other. Suddenly, a huge tree tumbles down and blocks the road in front of you. You speed up and decide to use the tree as a ramp. You fly across the obstacle, making it to the other side. But as you land, you notice a massive landslide. You speed away on the bumpy road. The whole mountain starts to shake and finally collapses. You're riding through everything, dodging every tree, rock, and bush until you make it out. You turn around and see the whole mountain collapse behind you. There's no going back. You continue through the open road until you see a broken sign to the airport. It's not far away, and when you finally get there, you try calling your friend. The phone no longer works. The reception is awful, but suddenly you realize all the cell towers are probably destroyed by now. The sun begins to set. You almost give up, but you spot him in the distance. You pick your friend up and head back to safety. As you ride back, the airport runway starts to collapse. It's located right next to the ocean. So with the infrastructure collapsing, ocean water begins to find its way to land. You're at maximum speed, trying to get away with a tidal wave gaining on you. With the whole mountain collapsed, you can't go back the same way. Water begins to touch your legs. The bike can barely make it out, but you find a little passage and escape. You detour and take the longer route through the city to get back to the shelter. But the city looks even stranger than when you were there in the morning. Many rats and animals are roaming the streets. Lampposts and telephone poles are blocking the roads. Glass windows you saw a couple of hours ago are now all over the floor. It's too dark to see ahead, so you and your friend make camp in what used to be a convenience store. You make sure there's no roof above, otherwise it might cave in while you're sleeping. Many dangerous animals are lurking outside. You finally fall into a deep sleep. The next day, you ride along and the ground level gets even higher. In 24 hours, the ground rose by around 1.5 miles. You see a bunch of people walking, trying to find shelter. You tell them about the rescue team and explain to them how to get there. After a couple of hours, you finally arrive, but the place is deserted. There are no more improvised tents and buildings. All the people disappeared. You try to investigate and find out what happened, but you've got no clues. As you continue walking, you start to feel heavier than usual. Since the Earth is getting bigger and bigger, gravity is getting stronger as well. You get tired more quickly than expected, and an uphill walk seems impossible. You get back on your bike and continue driving in search of answers. In the distance, you spot a dome structure in the middle of a field. You enter and notice that everyone evacuated here. You settle in. Inside the dome, there's a construction of a giant vehicle the size of 3 malls. It'll be the new mobile city. 1 year later, the Earth's surface grew by 500 miles. Some mountains grew larger, but some are embedded in the land. Forests and jungles lost around 90% of their trees. Oceans and seas created a new map formation since so much water was trapped underneath the land. All of this made oxygen levels drop. The gravitational force became even stronger, making it much more difficult to walk without catching a breath. Climbing hills is definitely not easy. Many tsunamis, volcanoes, and earthquakes destroyed lands and cities, and they're now happening more frequently than before. The heat from the Earth's core is getting stronger. The entire world economy collapsed as soon as the Earth started to get bigger. Digging for oil is now impossible, so you can't use any vehicle that's gas-powered. The vehicles of today have specialized wheels for rough terrain and are powered by the sun. Everyone lives in those giant domes with huge wheels to constantly change location whenever it gets risky. Congratulations! You're now one of the dome drivers, and you're heading to the East Coast. The place is packed with around 5,000 people living and working inside. Everyone has specific responsibilities so that the area there can be well maintained. But wait, traffic? Another mobile dome city is in front of you, and it's barely moving. As long as everyone's in the dome, they're safe. For now.
I don't know who I'm writing this to or why. It's the end of the world after all, so everybody knows all I have to say anyway. But somehow, I feel that I have to tell this to someone. So, it began as slight jolts from under the ground. Nobody really paid attention to them, especially in seismically active regions. People thought these were just minor earthquakes. They talked about them in the news, but only few actually cared. My parents, I was only 12 back then, were among those who did, but let's save it for later. In just a year, the jolts became much stronger and more frequent. In some areas, they turned into full-fledged earthquakes, doing a lot of damage to cities and villages. Worse still, previously dormant volcanoes began waking up. All over the world, people started raising alarm. Scientists talked a lot about climate change and impact of humankind, but it was obvious nobody really had any definitive answers. It didn't get any better either. As months went by, earthquakes and volcano eruptions gradually grew in power and frequency. At first, only one major natural disaster per month was reported. But in 2 more years, there were at least 4 of them occurring within the same period in every corner of the world. Even the normally calm regions suffered from quakes and resulting tsunamis. People tried to adapt, but it was all unfolding too fast for us to react adequately. All we had left to do was to learn to be always ready to move out from our homes and run. We stopped building big and sturdy apartment buildings, opting for lightweight 3D printed houses. They were easily destroyed but easily built too, which was a huge advantage. Items of luxury were rapidly losing their value, while on the other hand, mobile electronics and survival tools grew in price. People began really appreciating what they had and each other. Neighbors were helping one another, and whole towns unified their efforts to build strong communities and prepare for the worst together. And the worst came sooner than we expected. One day, the whole planet was shaken in one titanic earthquake. We thought it was the end for us all, because the ground went on shaking for hours and didn't cease until the next day. And then came reports from the Atlantic coast. The ocean receded, leaving vast swaths of naked sand and corals. Research teams on helicopters went to learn what caused this cataclysm and found the unthinkable. There was an enormous whirlpool in the middle of the Atlantic, hundreds of times bigger than the largest sinkhole in the world. The water from the ocean was gushing down the gigantic drain, as if someone pulled the plug on the bottom. In a sense, that was exactly what happened. Tectonic plates beneath the Atlantic came apart, forming a huge gap in the bottom. Boiling magma poured out, but was extinguished by the overwhelming mass of water, which then rushed down into the abyss. It went away so quickly that the overall water level fell in a matter of hours. The event was dubbed the Great Atlantic Rift, but it was still only the beginning. With the rising frequency of earthquakes and eruptions, wind patterns around the world changed, resulting in massive hurricanes. It seemed the whole planet was against its inhabitants. But like I said earlier, my parents were the ones who cared, and they had to know the reason. They were geologists at the International Space Agency, which continued its work even through all the cataclysms. And it was them who came to the distressing conclusion. For some unknown reason, the Earth had started to grow in size. It would explain everything. The ever more frequent earthquakes were caused by tectonic plates come into motion. The flowing magma was pushed from the mantle up towards the crust and burst onto the surface in places suited exactly for that, volcanoes. And that meant there would be other events like the Great Atlantic Rift, only even more catastrophic. After another year, we moved to live in the agency, along with the families of other employees and research workers. The buildings were made to withstand almost anything, so we were protected from the horrors of the outside. We took in as many people as we could, but of course, it wasn't nearly enough. Millions more were left to their own devices, and we could only hope that everyone was safe. By that time, as scientists estimated, the planet had already grown 1.5 times its original size, and by the looks of it, the rate at which it ballooned was growing. In another year of our bunkered life, we witnessed it grow twice again. Rifts even bigger than the one in the Atlantic popped up in different parts of the world, causing widespread chaos. Everyone went to live underground where it was relatively safe. Communications between continents were all but lost, and all we learned about the situation above was from daring expeditions by scientists. The planet was ravaged by quakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, and hurricanes, happening almost daily now. Life on the surface was virtually impossible. It was then that the joint team of researchers and engineers suddenly came out with the solution they'd been working on for the last 5 years. They called it the Ark. It turned out several teams agreed to build huge spaceships to evacuate humankind, along with the surviving animal, fish, and insect species in case the Earth comes apart. And the time they'd feared finally came. Everyone in the agency's buildings, including me and my parents, were escorted to an enormous hall where one of the arks was kept. All other people from the continent who managed to come were also there. We were given personal IDs and then allowed to board. Each person was allocated a separate capsule that was to keep us hibernating for the whole time of space travel. We were told we were the colonists, the pioneers in space settlement. We were going to Mars. And that's how I ended up here, where I'm writing all this. We successfully boarded the Ark and were put to sleep in our capsules. When I woke up, we were already landing. I won't bore you with the details of terraforming and settling in our new home. At first, we all wore special suits equipped with oxygen tanks. But soon enough, we built a dome with artificial atmosphere and started making the territory suitable for living, both for us and for the animals we brought. Since then, 10 years have passed already. We're feeling almost at home on the red planet, which isn't really red anymore. There are lush forests and big cities sprawling all around. Mars is inactive, so there are no earthquakes or hurricanes here. Life is pretty peaceful, although it's as busy as can be with all the work that still has to be done. But all this time, we've all been anxiously watching our home planet grow in size. At first, it was barely visible in the night sky, but as months passed, it became more and more apparent until one day it could be viewed in some detail with an unaided eye. Today, it's the size of the moon in our skies and visible even in the light of day. The sun is much smaller from here than it was seen from Earth, so basically, our home planet is now larger than its star. Through telescopes, we can see its surface covered in scars and fissures dozens of times bigger than the Grand Canyon. There are no more seas and oceans, and continents drifted far apart. The once green and blue and welcoming world is now a barren wasteland, boiling with fire and brimstone. The sun isn't helping it either. When the planet was small, the star bathed it in its light and warmth, giving it life and energy. Now, when Earth is 100 times larger, the sun is scorching its surface and burning off the remnants of its atmosphere. But even that's not all. With the size, the gravity has grown too. Being so big and massive, Earth has collided with the moon, virtually eating it up. Venus, which was similar to the previous Earth, started to be tugged toward the suddenly grown planet and was soon to run into it as well. And Earth itself is slowly gravitating toward the Sun. Scientists say that one day it would first consume both Venus and Mercury and then get burned completely in the Sun's heat. Wow. All I can hope now is to never see it with my own eyes. Okay, imagine there's a huge hot ball hidden inside the Earth. It's floating in an ocean of molten metal. This ball also spins on its axis, but it moves faster than the rest of our planet. This is what the Earth's core looks like. The solid metal ball is the inner core, and it's 750 miles thick. That's roughly the distance between New York and Chicago, and the whole thing is made up of hot iron and nickel. The outer core is the molten ocean. To reach the edge of it, you'd need to dig a tunnel into the Earth that was about 3,700 miles long. But you would hardly want to go there because it's the hottest point on the planet. The core temperature is 11,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's greater than the surface temperature of the Sun. Another incredible thing about this place, the gravity at the outer core is 3 times stronger than that at the Earth's surface. This means that if we could somehow find a way to live near the core and you threw a stone there, it would fall 3 times faster than normal. It would become 3 times heavier. You would also become 3 times heavier. Now that doesn't bother you so much because things far worse will soon happen. Living conditions in the core would be the exact opposite of life on the International Space Station, and it'd be a lot harder than living on the surface. It would be difficult for you to even hold a fork in your hand because of just how heavy it would feel. Eating lunch would become a serious challenge. You'd break into a sweat just from writing with a pen on paper or typing on a computer. But if people could ever get used to these conditions, they'd become a lot stronger. Humans have learned to use the heat coming from inside the Earth as a source of energy. Some companies use this energy to heat water, which creates steam. This steam is used to power turbines that produce electricity. If the core ever cooled down and that heat disappeared, this kind of electricity might become very expensive. Some parts of Earth might become very dark, as people went back to using candles and fires to light things up at night. And you could forget about using your electric car as well, because charging it up would be just too much money. Phones, computers, the internet, all these things would cost a lot more. But this would actually be the least of our worries. Oh, just wait for it. The hot core's rotation creates the Earth's magnetic field. This field is like a shield that protects us from the sun and outer space. If the shield disappears, solar and cosmic radiation would pass through the atmosphere. The electricity supply would become seriously unstable. Microwaves, televisions, kettles, traffic lights, and computers could all be damaged. The screen of your laptop or phone would turn on and off randomly. Videos could freeze, and the batteries could run out in a second. Satellites would stop working, which means there wouldn't be any GPS system to rely on anymore. Say goodbye to navigating with your phone's map. Radio equipment would also stop working, so you wouldn't be able to make calls or send messages. Even now, when our magnetic field is working normally, solar flares can still create magnetic storms that disrupt electronics and affect people's health. Some people are sensitive to these storms and can get really bad headaches. If the magnetic field disappeared completely, every person on the planet, along with plenty of animals, would get seriously painful migraines. Scientists would have to invent special helmets that protect people from exposure to the magnetic storms. If the core cooled down and you became lost in a forest, it would be really difficult for you to find your way home even with simple equipment. Without the magnetic field created by the active core, your compass needle would no longer show where north, south, east, and west were. You would see the birds in the sky going crazy. They wouldn't know what direction to fly in for the winter, because south would no longer exist. In fact, no animal would be able to migrate anymore. In the sky, the location devices on planes would stop working. That means no more air travel until people find a new way to navigate. But hey, let's look on the bright side, because that's what we do here. You wouldn't have to go to the North Pole to see the northern lights anymore. Auroras would appear in the night sky everywhere. These occur because charged solar particles run into the magnetic lines stretching from north to south. But these lines will disappear if the Earth's core cools down, and the particles will light up the sky all over the world. A frozen core also means the tectonic plates will stop moving. There will be no more earthquakes anywhere in the world. But that's not as good as it sounds. The movement of these plates creates faults on the Earth's surface. They give us access to important minerals. With no more movement, producing fuel could become a lot harder. The price of gas might go up. Most people would have to stop driving their cars. There would be a lot more bikes and horses on the road, maybe some llamas. Volcanoes would also stop erupting. If the core cools, the magma cools. People who live near large active volcanoes would no longer need to worry so much. But there would be a downside to this. Volcanoes contain a huge amount of useful substances and minerals. The soil around volcanoes is very fertile, which is really good for agriculture. So more people would now have to eat artificially created food. There would be big problems with the supply of natural food products. Only rich people might be able to afford that classic tomato and cucumber sandwich. But the worst thing would be the long-term exposure to radiation, which is seriously bad for our health. More radiation means that the risk of getting diseases would be much higher. People would have to build special shielding to protect themselves from solar radiation. It would be way too expensive to cover the whole planet with this technology, so we just create separate shields for each city. Just imagine the side of every city covered by a huge protective dome. In this radioactive world, movement between cities would only be possible in special closed transport. People would need to wear protective suits. You wouldn't be able to go to the countryside anymore. Anyone still living in a village or a small town without much funding would be forced to live underground to protect themselves. Plants and animals would also have problems. Herbs, flowers, and trees would receive huge doses of radiation and wouldn't be able to bloom. Livestock wouldn't be able to eat grass and hay. Milk, cheese, and yogurt would be in real short supply. Plants would have trouble producing oxygen. The magnetic field not only protects us, it protects our atmosphere. A frozen core and no magnetic shield means that the solar wind would destroy the atmosphere in a few hundred years. The conditions on Earth would be changed completely. Humanity would no longer venture outside its protective domes with their artificial atmosphere. Instead, we'd have not only our cities, but also the last surviving pieces of nature, our trees, lakes, grass, meadows, and flowers. everything left outside the domes would turn into a scorched desert. This is what happened to Mars. The red planet has no seas, oceans, and lakes. Some scientists believe it's completely dry because its magnetic field disappeared. With no protection, Mars lost most of its atmosphere, and the sun's wind swept away all the surface water. But of course, this is just one of many theories. This took place billions of years ago, and no one can say exactly what happened. But don't worry, our planet won't turn into Mars anytime soon. The Earth's core is cooling very slowly. It will take another 2 billion years or so before it cools down completely. What's weird though is that our magnetic field can be unstable even today. In the southern hemisphere, there's a spot where the magnetic field is weak. This place is called the South Atlantic Anomaly. Charged solar particles flow through this spot, which can cause problems for orbiting satellites as they pass through. There are some other places like this around the world, but fortunately, they don't cause us any really big problems. Good thing.